There you go. We're now recording. We're going to get a move on and jump right into this week's information. And again, as we did last week, we're going to look at the objectives that WIDS, the state of Wisconsin technical college system, gives us for competency 6 for you guys. We have to go through the microscopic anatomy of body tissues, and that's just a bunch of cells and some other stuff. So that's not going to be too bad. And characteristics of tissue types, functions of tissue types, and then where are these different tissues located. So it is going to be quite a bit of new terminology. There is a lot of organization going on with tissues. So again, some of what we do that may seem a little weird, or you might seem a little lost. Again, we're going to reinforce a bunch of this dark green stuff on Thursday. We're not really going to do much of anything on Thursday with skin. With visible body. There's a couple little quizzes. There's a few things that you'll do on your own. But as far as like an actual kind of like lab with lab questions, those questions will be in the portfolio. And what we do tonight with skin is just about all you're going to get from me. We'll touch on a few things on Thursday, but we're going to look at the layers of skin. We're going to talk about keratinization, UV rays. Let's see. Secretions, the mantle, kind of the covering of the skin that helps to keep bad bacteria away. Regulation of body temperature, which we've already talked about a little bit, so we won't spend a heck of a lot of time on that. And then sensation. We have touched on that a little bit in the last few weeks, especially homeostasis. We're talking about sensory, those cutaneous sensory, as well as the hyperthermia case study. We talked about heat sensors and cutaneous sensors. So, and then we spend a couple weeks on the nervous system. So we're going to just kind of touch on that briefly. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about tissue repair and skin repair. All right, so let's get into tissues. Oh, okay, good. I can use my arrow. It wasn't letting me using my arrows on my computer, so I had to keep using my mouse. So now it looks good. All right, so chapter 4 in OpenStax gets into the tissues a little bit. These, remember, are a bunch of cells put together. This is our next level of organization. But we're at our last stop regarding the micro scale. So that's probably a sigh of relief for most of you, if not all of you, that we get to leave micro and move into macro. Totally understandable, but you know, just wait till advanced, and then you'll really get to loving micro. The micro side of things. So anyway, there are some additions though. It's more than just cells. We have the extracellular, right? The outside of the cell space. That's going to be comprised of what we call a matrix. So we're all in the matrix, right? All of our cells are certainly living within a matrix. Now, some cells we're going to see and some tissues have less matrix or even no matrix. Other tissue types are going to have a lot of matrix and only a few cells. So we'll keep that in mind as we go. Here are the 4 main tissue types. And we have 4 primary tissue types. This is where we're going to be spending our time and energy today for the most part, and then certainly all day, or not all day, but when we're together Thursday evening. The epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissues those are your 4 types of tissues. I'm going to work from the bottom up to the top, and then we'll start looking in a little more detail. Nervous tissue, again, we spend a couple of weeks on the nervous system. So today and Thursday, I'm going to give you a very limited amount of nervous system introduction. There are just basically 2 cells types we're going to look at. And one of those cells, a neuron, we're going to look at the kind of the parts of a neuron. And that's really it. So we're not going to spend a lot of time with nervous tissue. Muscle tissue, again, we spend 2 weeks or so on the muscular system. that's one type of muscle. We will see today that there are 3 different muscle tissue types. So anyway, that we'll spend a little bit of time there. And then the most probably ubiquitous or most spread out, it's everywhere, most plentiful tissue is going to be the connective tissue. Connective tissue is believe it or not, it's one of the few terms in anatomy that actually kind of makes sense. Connective tissue's function is to connect, so that's kind of nice. It does have a few other functions, but it does link epithelial and muscle tissue together. So we'll take a look at connective tissue in quite a bit more detail. There are going to be 4 different types of connective tissue that we're going to see. And then epithelial is where we're going to start. That's going to be the most complicated probably of the 4. Epithelial tissue, it doesn't have to be complicated. I'm going to do my best to eliminate as much confusion and complication as there is with epithelium. So let's kick it off with epithelial tissue. And before we do, I did want to stop real briefly at this extracellular matrix, because let me go back up to the beginning here. So tissues are cells and probably a matrix of some sort. So it's a kind of the negative space when we look at tissues. It's all of that area around the cells. And so that's the matrix. It's the fluid material between cells. Now, it's not exclusively water. That's one part of that extracellular matrix. In fact, we call that extracellular fluid. The fluid part of the matrix has a specific name. We just call it extracellular fluid. Now, the rest of the matrix is going to be a bunch of different proteins, primarily some glycoproteins, some proteoglycans, some other macromolecules. We're going to see a lot of, this is the area where we see a lot of ionic activity. This is where sodium ions live. For instance. So it's basically the outside of the cell, the extracellular area is filled up with a matrix. And again, some tissues have more matrix and less cells. Some tissues have a lot more cells and almost no matrix. So again, you'll see, and it's abbreviated ECM. So anyway, here's kind of a diagrammatic view of it, or illustration of it. And again, at the bottom here, you see an area that should be familiar to all of you now that we've made it through cells. We see the little kind of globes or balls on top, and on the bottom with some tails in between. That's indicative of a cell membrane, right? We've got the phospholipid bilayer. So we've got our lipids, and then our little integral membrane proteins in there. And then we go down a little bit, and we're now inside of the cell, right? So the bottom of my screen, it's going to be where the inside of the cell is, and the plasma membrane is here. So all of this that we see is considered the extracellular space, and is comprised of the extracellular matrix. And that matrix is going to be fluid, extracellular fluid, and then all kinds of different other protein structures. We might have collagen. That's probably one of the biggest extracellular matrix components, besides the fluid, is going to be collagen. Collagen fibers, I'm sure all of you or most of you have heard that term at some point. Collagen is a protein fiber, and it's going to provide strength and durability and allow for a little bit of trauma, frankly. So collagen provides some pretty good strength. There's another one called elastin. It's the word elastic, but without a C at the end, and instead it has an N. Elastin instead of elastic. So we see elastin fibers as well. Those are going to provide flexibility then, right? They provide elasticity. So depending on the individual, depending on where in the body and what age the individual is, there's so many variables and factors, but you're going to have collagen fibers and elastic fibers in your extracellular matrix. And again, some provide strength, some provide flexibility. We also see the proteoglycan as well. Again, it's going to be a carbohydrate with kind of like a protein backbone. So we've got all this polysaccharide or long chain carbohydrate, and then this little guy here, the little red deal, that's going to be the protein portion of this proteoglycan. Okay, so again, the glycan or the glucose is kind of the main feature of this particular item. Whereas down here, we would see a glycoprotein, where you've got the protein as the foundational primary, and the carb or the glyco is the secondary aspect. So anyway, a lot of action going on in the extracellular matrix. Again, here's the black and white of it. You've got water, proteins, there's elastin written out. And then again, we've got some glycoproteins as well as proteoglycans. The next slide talks a little bit about proteoglycans. So again, glycoproteins are proteins with a few carb attachments. And again, those carb attachments, they allow for communication in that extracellular space, because that, let me back up into the, what else is out here? What would be out in this area? We would see a capillary network more than likely, and capillaries are the blood vessels where we drop stuff off or pick stuff up. So all those micro little bits of vitamins and minerals, and then the amino acids and the glucoses and all of that, all the stuff you've consumed, remember, it ultimately needs to get into the cell, right? The ribosomes are what you eat it, but really it's the cells that are consuming it, right? So how do I get this apple or this chunk of steak to a cell in my big toe? Well, that's where digestive enzymes, and then certainly the bloodstream is going to pull out and absorb all of those nutrients. And then the bloodstream is going to be delivered everywhere in the body. And at the capillary networks, that's where we're able to drop off groceries and pick up garbage. So the other things that are floating around in here, right, are glucose molecules on their way to get inside of a cell. Some of those amino acids that we just consumed on their way to go inside of a cell. Different vitamins and minerals and whatever else it might be needing to travel inside of a cell. So there's a lot of action. They also call this the interstitial space. You've maybe heard of interstitial fluid or interstitial space. It's the same thing. That's the thing about A&P. There are 2, 3, 4 terms sometimes for the exact same thing. That lends to confusion. I get that. Some of it's due to the fact that we're talking Greek and we're talking Latin. So you might get the Latin term for something and the Greek term for something, two completely different terms that mean the exact same thing. So I think that's sometimes where confusion comes in. But extracellular space, interstitial space, okay, those are going to be the same general, that we're outside of the cell and we're outside of the bloodstream. Because there's really just 3 kind of main compartments for fluid: inside the cell, outside of the cell, and then the kind of the third, really 2. You're either in the cell or you're not in the cell. And then really that third one would be like in the bloodstream or in the lymphatic system, right? We call it plasma, right? In the blood, it's called plasma. When it's out of the bloodstream, it's called interstitial fluid. When it's in the cell, it's called cytoplasm. Plasma, fluid, plasm. So it's all the same stuff. It's just moving around constantly, dropping stuff off, picking stuff up. So anyway, that's the long and short of what's going on. Here's those proteoglycans. Again, it's primarily carbs with a little bit of a protein backbone. Glucosamine chondroitin is one we see. Heparin, which is a blood thinner, is another type of proteoglycan. Again, we're going to see usually when there's structures, the more structure in the matrix, probably the more need for shock absorption, for there might be just more I guess activity, maybe more pressure, more strain. So we do see the dermis, for instance, of the skin in certain areas is full of stuff in the matrix, because again the skin puts up with a lot of stress and a lot of strain. um, so anyway, let's see. Oh, I wanted to mention too this, and I think I did it a couple weeks ago. But remember, the study of cells is cytology, and the study of tissues, we call that histology. Yeah, your body makes heparin. HEPA has to do with the liver, so heparin's going to be made in the liver. Coumadin is like the synthetic heparin, I suppose, or one of them. Heparin is, you can get heparin, right? Yeah. But yeah, we make it. If you don't make it, or if you don't have enough for what the body's demands are, usually it'd be because you have some sort of chronic inflammatory condition. If you have chronic inflammation, you may have some heparin imbalances. We're seeing blood pressure and heart issues, cardiovascular issues going back to heparin. Um, it's one of the big chemicals that gets spritzed when we respond to stress. So chronic stress and heparin go hand in hand. So sometimes, a lot, we view these fluids in the body and the glands that they come from kind of as a well. And if the well runs dry, the spring that feeds the well, sometimes that spring will run dry, and that's where we need, medical intervention. Oh, okay. Yep. Cool. Warfare. No, I don't. Lori, what's the story behind warfarin or warfarin, depending
So
on.
I had to do, it wasn't research, it was more so just being curious, but the letters in warfarin stand for like the Wisconsin agricultural something, and it was because they were giving it to cows early on, and how it became that they started giving it to humans. It's just a really cool story. So
Cool. Yeah, a lot of medications are named oddly enough for stuff like that. You guys have heard of Premarin for like menopausal symptoms? Premarin means pregnant mare urine. So, you know, you know, hook up some horses, some female horses with catheters, and inject them, or give them progesterone in the mouth, keep them pregnant and get that urine and make those pills, baby. Hey, you got to keep menopausal women happy. I'll catheter every horse in the county if it'll keep my wife happy. She's 38, so I shouldn't talk so loud, because I know women and ages and stuff, they get funny. But yeah, she's 38, so that could happen. But anyway, her grandma had kids in their 40s, so you never know. I'm not. I don't know. I'm 45, so there's no way I'm done. All right. I love kids, but I don't want to be 60 when my kids are in grade school. All right. So anyway, holding tissues together, deep, deep, deep. All right. What happened to there we go. Tissue repair. Again, we'll talk a little bit about this on Thursday. Tissues can repair themselves. We hope they do, especially the epithelial tissues. But the regeneration power simply means that we have mitotic events happening, right? So when tissue gets damaged, it's going to trigger a whole cascade of events to occur. And one of those events is certainly going to be, we have to stop the bleeding. So we're going to get some specialized bleeding stopper chemicals. We call it hemostasis, not homeostasis. Hemostasis means to stop blood. So we've got to do that first. And then once we do that, we've already started rallying the collagen troops and whatever other troops are going to help out with protein with tissue regeneration, which again, usually if it's a structure, it involves protein. So we're going to see this stuff Thursday in a little bit more detail, but this is, again, it's another functional physiology thing. So we do study this in more detail in advance, but you do need to see at least a little bit of this terminology to get you started. But we do see some sort of issue going on externally. This is the skin that they're showing us, and this top layer is the layers, and this is the epidermis, and we see that there's blood. So we would have gone through the epithelial lining or epithelial covering, because epithelium, we'll see in a few minutes, doesn't have a doesn't have vascularization. There's no blood supply to any epithelial tissue, so it does get fed from the connective tissue where they do connect to one another. So the blood supply is going to be down here in the connective tissue, and as soon as we here's a capillary represented. As soon as a capillary gets breached, we have to bring in some what they call platelet plugs and all kinds of good stuff to kind of stop the bleeding. And then we get some blood thinners, right? We had to get rid of the clot. So we've got blood thickeners to kind of stop. We get platelets increase, and we get something called fibrin and fibrinogen and what they call thrombin. So we get all these different clotting mechanisms to come in. Meanwhile, we're also laying down fibroblasts. So fibroblast activity is going to increase. And again, guys, whenever you see blast, it means builders. Blasts are typically baby cells, or I don't want to say immature cells, but they're basically they're basically like grunts. They do the building, they do the grunt work, they're like apprentices. So whenever you see blast, it's some sort of newborn baby builder type. A lot of alliteration with the bees there. Blasts are babies that build. There you go. All right, so this is a fibroblast, so it's a baby that builds fibers. Thinking like collagen fibers or something like that, something protein related. So then we're left with some scar tissue, and then we've got the epithelium also scarring. Now the epithelial cells, we'll see, they regenerate a lot faster. They're regenerating all the time right now as we speak. And so scarring, depending on the depth of the wound, the scarring on the epithelium usually isn't going to be too bad. Now, if it's been an incision and it's been sutured, usually what they do, instead of suturing the layers, notice you've got multiple layers. What's below this yellow stuff? Well, it's going to be muscle. What's below that muscle? Well, if it's my abdomen, it's going to be my guts. So if I need an appendix removed, I've got to cut through epithelium. I've got to cut through epidermis, dermis, connective tissue. I've got to cut through fat. I've got to cut through the muscle wall of my abdomen, and then peritoneum, and then I finally get to the appendix. Well, pull the appendix out. Now I have to suture. So am I going to suture? A lot of physicians or surgeons will pull everything in like this, and they'll suture it like this. And so then you'll have that real deep scar. Really good surgeons who have time and don't have a golf outing that they have to attend, they're going to suture each layer nice together, so then you don't have all that deep scar tissue. You're just going to have a little scarring throughout. You see the difference would be major, especially if we're dealing with like shoulder surgeries, elbow, joint surgeries. I mean, I've had patients that have come in that have had complete reconstruction of their shoulder, and you can't tell. Every layer of muscle was nicely done, and we can get good range of motion. I have others that have had way too many cortisone shots, and enough cortisone shots can build scar tissue, and they have less range of motion. So scar tissue is a big deal with pain, with blood flow, with range of motion, with distal nutrient delivery, right? I mean, if I've got a lot of scar tissue here and I need to get nutrients here, scar tissue is like a dam, it's going to decrease the rate of flow. So then I may end up with some other issues. So scar tissue is a problem, or can be. Oh yeah, like a C-section, right? I mean, Yeah, absolutely. That, I mean, they've been doing C-sections like crazy in the last decade, last 20 years, really. The rate has gone through the roof. And depending on where you go in this country, there are counties that we've got a, 2 out of 3 births are C-section. You know, that's a lot, 65% C-sections. And yeah, that's a lot of, that's a revolving door, right? An assembly line. So they're just suturing, whoop, whoop, whoop. They get the big suture hooks and they just go to town and out the door, and maybe some staples while we're at it. And now you've got multiple visits. And I mean, we've had patients come in that they had a C-section, 10 years ago, and they still to this day are having all kinds of lower abdominal problems. They're having core muscle issues. They have trouble sometimes going up and down stairs because those core muscles do so much work, and there's so much nerve in there too. And the C-sections, I mean, that's a rough racket there. You're talking about a natural birth. I could walk into the clinic or walk into the ER or the ED at 40 weeks and get admitted, and bloop, baby's out. Day or two later, go home. You're talking maybe 8 to 10 grand. I go in and I get the works package with the pitocin and the epidural, and then I get the C-section, and then I get the 3 or 4 or 5 days at stay, and then I have to keep going back to get from stitches and everything. Baby's got issues. You're talking about just the C-section. You're talking 50, 70 grand. That's a lot of loot. And so if I'm on the money side of things, it behooves me to do more C-sections, right? Don't do it. All right. So anyway, keeps us all busy though, doesn't it? Like a customer for life. Womb to tomb, right? Cradle to grave. It's not even cradle to grave now. It's womb. In fact, we get you before the womb. We will botch up your reproductive organs before you've ever even thought that you were going to have a kid. Think about that. Yeah, yikes is right. Anyway, somebody's watching, so we better keep moving. This is going to be on YouTube, so I hope it gets a lot of hits. Well, heck, YouTube may not even publish it at this point. It's probably going to get dinged and red flagged and everything else. We're not that important. Well, you are. I shouldn't say we. I'm not. You are, though. Let's see. Where are we? Oh, we finally made it. This is your most fun class. Yeah, I do. I have we're only getting started, Lori. So you got 12 more weeks of this. The hard stuff's over. Now we get to do the fun stuff. All right. Well, this is still hard. Once we get out of tissues, then it's not hard. All right. So what we're going to do, we're going to go through epithelial, connective, muscle, and nerve. Okay. Epithelial's first. It's the most meat, so we're going to spend the most time here. I'll try to keep her going because there is so much to do. I don't want to be here till midnight. Well, you can check out anytime, but you don't have to. But by 9 o'clock, if I'm still on slide 20, we're in trouble. So let's see. We're going to see epithelium. We're going to look at 2 types, membranous and glandular. We're going to spend the bulk of the time in the membranous aspect. Again, the terms get weird. All we're saying with epithelium is that it's a covering or a lining. Epi is a prefix. It means upon something. So whenever you see epi, it simply means upon something. So anyway, epithelial. It's the upon something tissue. It's either a lining of a tube or it's a covering of something more solid. That's the membranous portion. The glandular type of epithelium is just that. It's a gland. It deals with glands. So we've heard of sweat glands and oil glands and endocrine glands. So those are types of epithelial tissue as well. So we do have quite a few different functions. Protection, certainly, if it's a lining or a covering, it's going to protect. We see sensory aspects, and then secretion, absorption, and excretion. Excretion is like eliminating something that we don't want. Secretion is spritzing something into a tube that we probably need. So secretion and excretion are similar. Absorption, of course, means we're taking something in. The secretion, excretion, I threw this in here too, to kind of break down the difference. And then again, this is more physiology stuff, but when we get to physiology, I'll remind you of this again. So don't feel like I don't ask anything on the test about this. But still, when you see these terms, you need to know what they are. Excretion, again, is waste removal. So like sweat gets excreted, for instance. Okay. Epithelial. All right, so this is the kind of the big general slide about epithelial tissue. Limited to no matrix. So what that means is we're primarily dealing with cells that are stacked on top of one another. So not little to no matrix. The membranous epithelium, which is mostly what we're going to be talking about, it has what we call a basement membrane. The basement membrane is just like it sounds. It's a thin layer that's going to connect epithelial tissue with the underlying connective tissue. So wherever we have the epithelium connecting with connective, there's going to be a basement membrane there. So the basement membrane brings those two types of tissues together. And it shows up pretty evident in when we look at slides. When we see cells or we see tissues, we're going to see cells. We're going to be able to see a defining marker called the basement membrane. So keep your eyes peeled for that as we go. Avascular simply means A in front of a word with a root means not or without. So vascular means there's some sort of blood supply or blood vessels involved. With an A in front of it means there isn't. So without a blood supply. So no blood supply to epithelial tissue. Again, they're very close in proximity. We see a lot of desmosomes and tight junctions. And certainly we see a lot of asexual reproduction and mitosis going on with epithelial cells. Again, it's a lining or a covering. So protection is a big deal. We're going to kind of hang out in the membranous area for quite a while. I shouldn't say quite a while, for probably another 10 minutes or so. We classify epithelium based on a couple of factors. One is the shape of the cell. The cells of epithelial tissue are going to be either really kind of flat or squashed. They call them squamous or squamosal. That simply means flat or squashed. Cuboidal, just like it sounds, lo and behold, means cube shaped. And then columnar, again, just like it sounds, are going to be more like a column shape. So squamous are flat, cuboidal are more boxy, and columnar are taller, more column-like. Pseudostratified columnar, we'll talk about that later. I don't want to get the cart before the horse too much. We'll just stick with these three for now: flat, cubes, or columns. And then I'm going to come back to this slide and just, no, we'll go right to it. These two right over here, we see they're kind of hidden up here. With the other way we classify is we modify the shape. So squamous, cuboidal, or columnar with an adjective, and that adjective is either going to be simple or stratified. Simple means we have one layer. Stratified means we have many, more than one, two or more. So if I put simple in front of squamous, it means one layer, simple. Squamous meaning flat, one flat layer of cells. This is epithelium, so it's a lining or a covering. Is one flat layer of cells going to be beneficial if I'm trying to protect underlying anything? Probably not. So we're not going to see simple squamous in a protection spot. We usually only really see it when we're dealing with gas exchange. When I need rapid diffusion of gases to occur, so like in the alveoli of the lungs, for instance, I'm going to see simple squamous epithelium. I need oxygen. So I need some modicum of protection, but I don't need, we're not dealing with high traffic, high friction areas. Plus, I need gases to diffuse quickly through the tissues. The other way we can think of things is as multiple layered, and that would be stratified. The word strata means layer, so stratified just means layered, multiple layers. Yeah, yeah, right. So a lot of good TV shows in the 90s and 2000s and even into today that get into medical terminology. I believe it or not, students always ask me about this, and I really need to do it. Again, time is difficult, right? To get, it's a commodity, and but the show Bones apparently is excellent. My parents love it; they watch it. But when your parents are old and they say, "Hey, you should watch this," you're thinking, "Oh." you know, is that going to be like Dynasty or Falcon Crest or, one of those deals? So, but anyway, yeah, Bones. I really do want to see that. When I was young and in college, the big show was ER. Back in '93 or '4. Now it's the ED. You couldn't have a show called ED though. I'd have to be on a different network. Anyway, let's see. The Good Doctor. Yeah, I've heard about that one. Again, I haven't seen it. I get sucked into documentaries. I like Netflix documentaries. I just watched the Challenger one. I think I told you the guys the other day. And now this morning I watched, it wasn't on Netflix, it was on YouTube. It was a documentary about The Price is Right, the perfect bid, it's called. If you guys like Price is Right, that's a good one. The Perfect Bid. A guy he spent 30 years documenting every single thing that ever sold. And he was a math nerd, and he knew, he went on like 30 some shows and got called up. Yeah. Yeah, if you want to think about, if you want to watch the show ED, just turn the TV on. You'll get a 30-second clip. So anyway, I keep getting distracted. Let's see. I blame all of you. Frankly, you're all guilty. So let's see. Stratified. Uh, yeah, right. I know we have to filter a lot, right? Especially with young eyes and minds. So anyway, yeah, stratified, many layers. If we do stratified squamous, many layers of flat tissue or of flat cells. Stratified squamous, this looks better for protection. So we might see this maybe when we deal with the skin or the epidermis of the skin. Cuboidal, again, we can have simple cuboidal or stratified cuboidal. Columnar, we could have simple columnar. We can also have stratified columnar, multiple columns. We don't see it very often in the body. The conjunctiva, kind of the clear kind of film over the eyes, believe it or not, is stratified columnar. There's a couple other spots. It's rare though. I mean, multiple layers of columns isn't really, that doesn't jive really that well with what we're trying to accomplish in most organs. So we don't see it that often. Pseudostratified, there's that term. Pseudo meaning appears to be but isn't. Stratified columnar, what that means is it's one layer. So you're going to be asked potentially how many layers of cells are within pseudostratified columnar epithelium, and it's one. Pseudostratified appears to be many layered but isn't. So the clue is in the name, right? You don't have to memorize. If you know that stratified means many layers and pseudo means appears to be but isn't, then you can determine that it's one layer just by that verbiage. Transitional, you notice that we've got thick and then we've got thin. We see transitional, particularly with like the urinary bladder and the urethras, where we have, it's kind of like a balloon situation where when the balloon is empty, it's really thick. The cells are a lot thicker when it's relaxed. When I blow the balloon up, right, the cells get stretched out. So it's still a balloon. It's the same organ, but the cell shape and structures do change a little bit when that particular item distends. So a couple other things we do see are cilia. So anyway, if you're ever asked about transitional epithelium, you want to think urinary bladder. That's the linkage. Transitional equals urinary bladder. Okay. One thing we see with columnar tissue are goblet cells. Goblet cells, kind of like Harry Potter, uh, except that there's not fire in there. There's usually some sort of mucus. So goblet cells secrete. It's witch's brew, right? It's a good time. It's almost October. Eye of newt in the goblet cells. Uh, no, it's actually just some sort of mucus typically. And that can be gross, right? It can be slimy and Halloweeny too. But yeah, goblet cells. And then microvilli. Microvilli, remember, are little tiny curves of cells, and microvilli are going to provide more surface area for absorption. So we usually see microvilli in the small intestines. And those are going to be columnar cells. And then lastly, we do see cilia. You can see them on both the pseudostratified columnar and the regular simple columnar. We do see cilia. And you'll recall from cells last week that cilia relate to tiny hair follicles that help with filtration. So anyway, a couple of items on stratified columnar. Again, it's pretty rare. The male urethra, as well as near the anus, as well as the conjunctiva of the eyes. So we don't really see stratified columnar very frequently. Transitional, again, you want to associate with the urinary bladder. Simple epithelium, again, if it's simple and it's flat or simple squamous, it's going to be permeable to many substances. We're thinking gases primarily. So rapid diffusion of gases would occur with simple squamous epithelium. Simple cuboidal, one layer of cube-like cells, is going to be found typically with glands. So we want to relate simple cuboidal and glands with one another, as well as the ducts that are associated with those glands. Here's a slide showing simple squamous epithelium. By the way, too, as we look at slides today, we'll see a few today, but again, our focus on Thursday is going to be to look at a lot more slides of tissues. We're going to see a couple of defining features. Whenever we look at slides, we're looking for dark, what they call the dyed aspects, and these purple circles have been dyed. This is the nucleus. Chromosomes and some of the chromatin in the nucleus is going to take on the specific, some of the specific components that are in the dyes that we use for staining. So anyhow, that's how we can kind of recognize cell shape, cell amount, cell structure is based on the dyeing technique and whether or not and how well the nuclei are dyed. So we do see a lot of kind of flat cells here, and we only see one kind of layer. There's not a lot of action going on here. Okay, so one kind of thin layer of cells. Again, so you can see the black here, or not black, but like dark violet. Okay, those are the nuclei of these cells. So these are simple squamous cells. And then if we go to the next one, we can see we've got, again, kind of a single layer of cells. Here's another single layer of cells and another single layer of cells. So what we have here is some sort of a cross section of some tubes. These openings are the lumens of the tubes. So this is some sort of tubule, which just means small tube, but a tube. Okay? So this tube happens to be one layer of cells, and they look to be cuboidal. So we'd say these particular cells or this particular tissue contains simple cuboidal cells. We've got some other stuff going on out here. By the way, these dark lines that are kind of around the outsides of each of these bundles, that's the basement membrane, which it mentions right up here. And that basement membrane is going to be connected with the underlying tissue, which is typically connective tissue. This looks like it might be looks like cartilage. It looks maybe like adipose. Adipose and cartilage are very similar to one another. So anyway, Okay, simple, right? One, I don't mean easy simple. Nothing simple about it except the number of layers, which is one. Okay, simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar. And we're going to see those. We mentioned them, the goblet cells, the cilia, and the microvilli. We see simple columnar oftentimes in the kind of the lower GI tract. And then that pseudostratified, we see a lot of cilia within those. Pseudostratified is going to have it's gonna look a little different. I'll show you instead of trying and explain it. The nuclei, remember, are the purple dyed parts, and we can see the nuclei are all kind of arranged in a linear fashion, and then we can see the kind of the basement membrane here. So this is each individual cell has a nucleus. So, and they all kind of look like columns if we were to break them down. So we could say this is simple columnar. Now, when I look at the next one, we can see I've got what appear to be some columns, and here's this basement membrane, but there's some stuff going on down here. Like here's kind of an oddball shaped cell, kind of a diamond shape. It looks like this one stopped. This looks like it's stratified, and one of the key features that would tell me this is not that it's going to be columnar tissue is the presence of the cilia and the goblet cells. So the presence of the cilia and the goblet cells tell me this is going to be columnar, even though it looks like, I don't know what it looks like, a mess. But because I can see cilia and goblets, I know it's columnar. Is it simple columnar or pseudostratified columnar? Again, you're looking for the organization of the nuclei. If you have nice arrangement of nuclei in a parallel fashion, that's going to be simple. If you've got kind of a scattered mess of disorganized nuclei, that's going to be pseudostratified. Okay, let's keep moving. Stratified epithelium simply means multiple layers. So we can have stratified squamous, stratified cuboidal. And again, we touched on stratified columnar a few minutes ago. Stratified, I don't know, my slides must have got goofed up, but all this stratified cuboidal should actually be after the stratified squamous. It doesn't matter, but there it is, stratified cuboidal, 2 or more rows of cubes. Basement membrane is difficult to see. We oftentimes see stratified cuboidal in sweat glands as well as the pharynx or the back of the throat. Stratified squamous means many layers of flat cells, and these are going to be either keratinized or non-keratinized. When you see this word keratinized, it simply means hardened. Okay, keratinized means hardened. Okay, so this is the type of tissue we would see with the epidermis of the skin. We would see keratinized or hardened multiple layers of flat cells. Okay, the keratinized layer covers the outer skin of the body. And again, you can see kind of the basement membrane, this darker spot here where we connect the dermis or the connective tissue with the rest of the epithelium. If we have keratinized, and again, we must have non-keratinized, and that just means that we don't have hardening on the surface. And we would find this in the vaginal canal, the cervix, the mouth, esophagus, areas that we don't want hardening. We don't want them to be dried out. We want there to be some moisture and lubrication. In fact, just FYI, a pap smear, when they're taking a pap smear, they're trying to determine whether or not the cells of the cervix have become keratinized or not. Hopefully, they're not. Hopefully, if we do a pap smear and we look at the tissue sample of the cervix, it's going to look something closer to this than this. Keratinization means hypermitotic events, which is normal with the epidermis, not normal with the mouth or the vaginal canal and cervix. Transitional epithelium, again, that's the urinary bladder. It's going to change its size and shape and thickness depending on whether it's full or empty. So those are all of your membranous epithelial options. Again, it's either simple or stratified. It could be pseudostratified in one instance, but simple, one layer, stratified, many layers. And then they're either flat or squamous, cubed or cuboidal, columns or columnar. Okay, so in any kind of combination of those. And then we had a couple oddballs, transitional, which just changes its thickness. Think of the bladder with that. And then pseudostratified columnar, which we find certainly in the upper respiratory tract and a little bit down into the trachea as well. The ciliated epithelium with goblet cells. So glandular epithelium is the other type of epithelium. Remember, it's either membranous or glandular. Glandular is for secretory, not secretive, not that kind of, well, it might be, but secretory, it secretes something. Usually it's going to be some sort of hormone if it's an endocrine gland. If it's an exocrine gland, it's going to be some other type of fluid that we're secreting through a duct. This could be digestive. It could be an enzyme. Exocrine glands secrete enzymes. Exocrine glands secrete sweat. They secrete oil. They secrete earwax. They secrete all kinds of good stuff. Endocrine glands do not have ducts. They spritz their chemistry directly, which we call hormones, directly into the bloodstream. Okay, so exo means it exits through a duct. Endo means it stays inside the bloodstream. All right, or that stays inside, it goes inside of the bloodstream. Some of this gets a little bit much. I don't know how much time we really need to spend on this, but we can have tubular, tubular or alveolar, which look more like grapes. So kind of a, like I say, like a tube versus some kind of a grape appearance. Simple, meaning there's one duct that goes to the surface. Compound means we're going to have multiple ducts. So you could have one gland with multiple ducts. That's a compound exocrine. Simple exocrine is one gland, one duct. Well, there really isn't because, or one duct. Okay, simple meaning one. Again, there's simple. All right, so here's a simple tubular gland in the stomach. This is going to secrete some sort of enzyme, more than likely. Simple tubular. And then we see simple branched. So you just have branches. Still, it's simple because it has one opening. So they're branched, but they have one opening. If these were alveolar, they'd be more grape, look more like grapes. Okay, exocrine. All right, couple types of exocrine glands. We spend a whole week almost on the endocrine system. So I'm not going to give you, really the only thing you need to know about endocrine right now is that there are no ducts and we secrete into the bloodstream. That's all you need to know about endocrine. So everything else is an exocrine gland. All right, so thinking like sweat glands, oil glands, tear glands, tear ducts leading to glands, tear created in the gland leading to tear ducts, wax in your ears created by glands. All of these of the exocrine variety. So we have apocrine glands. These are oftentimes found on top of the head or in the armpit or groin area. Holocrine, we're going to see these as primarily oil glands, and holocrine, the whole cell actually detaches and then kind of explodes to release its chemical. I think I've got an image of that. Here's a holocrine. So you've got the cell breaks off and then kind of explodes, releasing its oil. Apocrines, these can so this could lead to some damage, right? For sure. Apocrine, these can get damage as well. As these pinch off, these can lead to some damage as they're secreting. Merocrine, not so much. These guys are less, they don't have to worry about much damage. They're the most prevalent type of gland that we see. Whew. Okay, well, we made it through epithelium. Let's go through connective for a few minutes. Yeah, I bet. I haven't been paying attention. I'll have to go back and watch just to see what comes up. It's when I'm watching YouTube videos, yeah, sometimes I always have closed captioning on if they have them, and sometimes it is just mind-blowing what comes across there. So anyway, connective tissue is next. We did epithelium. Remember, epithelium is a lining or a covering. Connective tissue would be then deep to that. Okay, pork rinds. All right, sweet, yummy. So general functions. Salute to general function, by the way, and general structure. They're both here tonight. So anyway, the connective tissue connects, supports, transports, and protects. Okay, connective tissue, just like it sounds. It's going to connect that epithelium with the underlying structures. This is where we find vascularization. This is where we find a lot of blood supply. So it is a supportive tissue as well as having a ton of extracellular matrix. So you want to definitely remember that. Definition, basically, a basic definition of connective tissue is cells in a matrix. Doesn't get any easier than that. Cells in a matrix. Epithelial, remember, it's just cells kind of compacted and piled on top of one another. So connective tissue, cells in a matrix. That's the most prevalent aspect of connective tissue. There are 4 different types of connective tissues. This is the first type. It's called fibrous. It just simply means there's a lot of fiber involved. And here are the types of fibrous connective tissue. The descriptions discuss, in essence, like how much fiber is involved. If we don't have a lot of fiber and again, what fiber or where are we talking about? We're talking about in the matrix. So when there's not a lot of fiber in the matrix, we would say it's loose connective tissue or areolar. If there's a lot of fiber in the matrix, we say it's dense connective tissue. Irregular and regular have to do with the arrangement of those connective tissue fibers, primarily thinking of like collagen probably. So regular and elastic. Regular connective tissue that's dense is going to be like tendons, ligaments, that type of thing. Irregular, dense. Anyway, we'll see some images of these in just a second. So anyway, we either have loose or dense. And then in between, we're going to have a couple of other fibrous types. Adipose is a fancy word. We generally think of a fat storage unit. So adipose cells store fat, so energy. There's very little matrix with adipose tissue, but there are some fibers. Reticular, we're going to see that primarily in like the spleen and a couple of other spots where we see bone marrow. Wherever we see blood cell production, we're going to see reticular connective tissue. So anyway, 4 types of connective tissue. 1, fibrous. 2, bone. 3, cartilage. And 4, blood. We spend 2 weeks on bone. We'll talk about cartilage when we get there as well. And then blood, of course, we'll spend a good week or 2 on that later on. But bone is a connective tissue simply because it's cells in a matrix. The matrix for bone is a hardened matrix. The cartilage is going to be soft chondrocytes or cartilage cells suspended in a matrix. We're going to see 3 different types of cartilage. And then finally, blood. Blood, that seems weird. Blood's a tissue? Yep, it's cells in a matrix. The matrix is called plasma. The cells are red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. So anyway, a couple of just brief deals here. Again, we're going to go through this in more detail on Thursday. So if I start kind of zooming a little bit, it's okay because we see all of this stuff again in more detail on Thursday. So loose connective tissue, again, we would maybe think of like the dermis of the skin. We see not a lot in the way of cells, not a lot in the way of fibers. It's just kind of a mishmash of a lot of stuff going on, and it's not very densely packed. We see a lot of negative space. By negative space, I mean all those areas where you don't really see anything. Okay, that's going to be fluid primarily. That's the matrix. That's the fluid portion of the matrix. Okay, we see some mast cells and some collagen fibers and some other cells. So anyway, that's loose connective tissue. And here's a drawing. If you don't like the picture, you get the illustration there, or maybe you like them both. Adipose tissue, again, we generally think of fat cells or adipocytes or adipocytes. Okay, and fibroblasts, macrophages, and mast cells. Mast cells, we think of like immune boosting properties with those. Functions, again, energy storage unit. Okay, so adipose. And again, you can see there's not much in the way of matrix. These, you see maybe a little bit of fiber right in through here. We've got little chunks of fiber. There's maybe a little more fibers just kind of scattered around. Okay. White and brown. Brown fat is noticed kind of between the shoulder blades, right around the throat area. Looks like around the heart. Brown fat really gets triggered when we're extremely cold, like excessively cold situations. We might see some of the energy stored in the brown fat being used to help with some of our shivering aspects, as well as conservation of energy, again around the heart area. Brown fats also, babies, newborns, fetuses and newborns have the brown fat that helps again with some of their nutritional needs that we don't necessarily have as we get older, or at least in the extreme that they do. So anyway, reticular tissue, fat generally we think of as being yellow. Reticular tissue, again, we're thinking of spleen, lymph nodes, bone marrow, something to do with blood cell production. You can see there's quite a network of fibers, but within that network and around that network, you can see a lot of little kind of faded circles in there. Those are going to be red blood cells. Red blood cells, remember, they do not possess a nucleus. And so when I do a blood smear, the red blood cells, you can still see them, but you're not going to see that distinct nucleus that's going to be dyed kind of that purpley color. So that's why these don't pop. Poop. You just can't hardly see them. It's because the nucleus didn't get dyed, because there isn't a nucleus, but you can still see some shadowy effects of those red blood cells. So that's indicative that we're probably in the lymph node, a spleen, or bone marrow. That's reticular connective tissue. Lastly, in the fibrous group, so again, fibrous, we had loose, adipose, reticular, and now dense. And dense just means we have a lot of fibers in the matrix, and they're going to be arranged regularly or irregularly. Okay, if they're regularly arranged, again, they're going to be in parallel rows. We'd maybe typically see, let me back, here we go, forward, here we go. Maybe see this nice regular arrangement. We'd see these parallel lines and a lot of fibers. We can see a little bit of purple, darker purple spots in there. Those are going to be indicative of the nuclei. Then we come look at this mess, and you can see it's dense, right? There's a ton of fibers, but there's no regular arrangement whatsoever in there. So generally the regular arrangement we're going to see with tendons and ligaments. Again, they provide support, they provide strength, they provide durability and flexibility. Yeah, absolutely. Yep, yummy. Dinner time somewhere. There's more dense regular. This is elastic fibers versus collagen fibers, collagenous. All right, so this is going to have more flexibility. By the way, I just kind of zip past this and assume that you guys know what I'm talking about when I say tendons and ligaments, but I don't want to assume anything. Tendons connect a muscle to a bone. So whenever we connect a muscle to a bone, we're looking at the tendon, that is the attachment site. So we're going to have a lot of linear movements, right, with muscles. The arrangement of the tendons, or the fibers of the tendons, is going to be in a linear arrangement as well. And then, of course, ligaments are going to connect a bone with a bone. So bone to bone, so a bone and a bone together is called a joint or an articulation. Ligaments are going to be around joints to provide support to the joint. So you can see they show a shoulder joint here. Then we've got some ligaments around there. And again, ligaments are going to be very dense and regular and primarily collagen. So they're going to look more like that, a ligament. And a tendon may look a little more like this. It may have a little more elasticity to provide some more flexibility for movement. Okay, so fibrous connective tissue. Then we've got bone as a type of connective tissue. Again, cells in a matrix. So we're going to have a hardened, calcified matrix for bone with what we call osteocytes. The mature bone cells are called osteocytes. You guys all know osteo means bone, cytes means cells. So we've got mature bone cells. Okay, and then they're going to be embedded in a matrix. The matrix accounts for about 2/3 of the total there. And again, we're going to spend a couple weeks next week. This is kind of your teaser trailer for next week's episode on bones, functions of bone tissue, support, protection. I think you guys probably already know that, but maybe some aspects that maybe like calcium, right? We store calcium in bone, and muscles are attached to bone. That last bullet, though, that may be one that is new to some of you, is that bone tissue assists and aids in blood cell formation. So red blood cells and certainly some white blood cells and platelets are going to be formed in bone. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. We'll spend plenty on it next week, but we do have all kinds of action. I'm not even going to stay on that one. So anyway, compact bone, that's going to be kind of the more dense aspect of bone. And then cancellous, we could also call that spongy bone. Spongy bone is generally found at the ends of your long bones, as well as pretty much making up the bulk or the majority of the inside of the rest of your bones, your skull bones, your rib bones, your sternum, your hips. They're going to primarily be cancellous or spongy bone on the inside. Then all bones have a periosteum covering with a thick, compact layer underneath it. So anyway, I'm not going to belabor this because I don't want to give away too much for next week, or you won't show up. You'll just, I already know about bones. I don't need to come next week. So I'm going to keep moving, and I better get away from here quick. Whew, there we go. Cartilage. Chondro means cartilage. Chondrocytes, that just simply means cartilage cells. And again, they're going to be the primary cell. In fact, the only cell type present within cartilage tissue. Osteocytes are really the only cell in bone. We do see different, stages of growth with the osteocyte or the chondrocyte. We will see osteoblast, osteoclast. We'll see chondroblasts, so we see other cells, but they're still all under that same. For cartilage, they're all going to be chondrocytes. For bone, they're going to be osteocytes. The matrix, by the way, too, bone is not avascular. I mean, bone is actually producing a lot of your blood cells. Cartilage, however, is avascular. No blood supply to cartilage. We get nutrition to our cells, our chondrocytes, that come from neighboring tissue that allows nutrients to diffuse past the membrane and into the matrix of the cartilage tissue. And then the cells are just kind of floating around and swimming in the matrix and gobbling up whatever came in. We have three types: hyaline cartilage or hyaline cartilage. It's kind of just shiny, translucent. This is what we find at the ends of bones. This is the cartilage at the ends of your bones. It's very cushiony. It provides a little bit of extra cushion. We see quite a bit of matrix with hyaline cartilage. Fibrocartilage implies we've got fibers involved. It's the strongest and most durable due to the fact that we have all of these fibers. So we can see these chondrocytes, and then we can see all of all of these fibers, this collagen fibers scattered throughout. So we would call this collagen. We would call this fibrocartilage. And we would call all these fibers collagen. It'll come out one of these days. Okay, I think we made it. All right, elastic cartilage, just like it sounds, is going to have more elasticity than density. So this is going to provide more strength and flexibility. This is what we'd find maybe elastic, maybe like the tip of the nose or the ears. Okay. We would find these in your intervertebral discs, and then the menisci in between your knee and your knee, where the femur ends and the tibia begins, the distal femur, proximal tibia. There are a couple little, they look like gummy savers. They're like little cartilaginous cushions. They're called menisci. One is a meniscus. Some people tear their meniscus. They have to have arthroscopic surgery to get it repaired or get their knee cleaned up, or, you know, that type of stuff. So well, it's not entirely avascular, I suppose. It's not. I would say that it's the bleeding is coming from not the cartilage. The cartilage is going to be deeper. The bleeding is coming from the connective tissue underneath, coming from your dermis. I'll get it out. Yeah, the whole ear isn't cartilage. It's just within the ear. But yeah, the outer surface is going to be epidermis, no blood. But then once you get past the epidermis, just like skin anywhere in the body, you're going to have the blood supply of the dermis, and that's where the nerve. That's why it hurts too. Is there are nerves in the dermis? Nerves in the dermis, blood in the dermis. That's where the blood and the pain comes from. Deep to that's going to be where the cartilage is found. Blood is also considered to be a connective tissue. I know that seems weird, but again, plasma is the matrix. Formed elements are the cells, and we call that red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Again, we spend a lot of time on blood here in about a month. So here's what a blood smear might look like. Again, we don't have any type of nucleus within the red blood cells. The bulk is red blood cells, as you can see, as well as the negative space, what we call the matrix. This would be plasma. You can't really see the plasma. All of these are dyed, so that tells me that it's going to be a white blood cell. White blood cells do have a nucleus. We also see some other little kind of purpley dark splotches. Those are platelets. Platelets also have a nucleus, so they're going to dye purple as well. So anyway, that's a blood smear. We're going to spend a lot of time on that soon enough. Oh man, we're home stretch here, believe it or not. We're probably just getting to second, maybe rounding second, actually. I guess that's scoring position. So we're getting closer. Muscle tissue. All right. So we did epithelial. We did connective. Those are the bulky ones. Now it's on to muscle. Not a lot of bulk here. And then nerve. Not a lot of bulk there. And then we'll do skin. Skin is very brief. So I guess we're probably a third. Yeah, we're rounding. We'll be rounding third as soon as we get out of muscle. Skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. Those are the three muscle types. We classify muscle based on whether or not there are stripes or striations, and that has to do with fiber type, and it has to do with control, nervous control, voluntary versus involuntary. Voluntary means that I have some sort of conscious control over it. Involuntary means I don't generally have any type of conscious control over it. So skeletal muscle is considered striated. So we're going to see, think of the word striated like the word striped. Okay, so skeletal is going to have stripes, and it's going to be under voluntary control. When we get to the muscle chapter in a couple of weeks, we're going to be focused on this first category of muscle tissue. We're going to be focused on skeletal muscles. The other two tissue types for muscle are going to be smooth, which means no striations or stripes, and it's involuntarily controlled. So the nervous system regulates the activities of smooth muscle without your input. You don't have control over it. A lot of your visceral your guts, right? If it's a tube in the body, it's smooth muscle. So as we go throughout the semester, we're not going to see a lot of smooth muscle specifics until we get to um, probably about the cardiovascular system. That's when we'll see smooth muscle, and then we'll see it the rest of the semester. So if it's a tube, it's got smooth muscle. And then cardiac is striated, so it's similar to skeletal in that way, but it's involuntary. We don't have any control over the cardiac muscle. It just beats, and we don't have to tell it to. Thankfully, we wouldn't get anything done. It has to beat about every second of the day. Yeah. And again, we spend plenty of time on cardiovascular and the heart, so I'm not going to belabor too much. I do just want to introduce you to some of these slides and what they look like under the microscope. Again, we see all of these stripes, so that tells me it's got to be striated, so it's either cardiac or skeletal. So that's going to be your first indicator. Does it have stripes? Yes. Okay. Then go to, is it skeletal or cardiac? Well, skeletal has a lot more paralleled arrangement for one thing. Skeletal also, notice it's multinucleated. It's hard to really tell here because these nuclei could be, where does one cell begin and another end? And is this one cell? Is this a bunch of cells? It's hard to really make a determination from this slide. But we do see many nuclei and we do see a lot of stripes. What I don't see with heart is some of these little extras. We see these kind of jagged, dark, groovy lines in here. And you can kind of see some breakups in the striations. See, there's some spacing too. There's some spacing here. We see a nucleus. This is one cell. This is one cell. This is one cell. This is one cell right here. You can see the edge of it and the edge of it. Okay. But you can see some striations, so we know it's got to be striated. Is it cardiac? Is it skeletal? I see stripes. Well, you're going to go after these intercalated discs, and you're going to go after whether or not there's kind of like some breakup in the striations. Notice with skeletal, we don't see a lot of that breakup. They're pretty dense, and we also don't see those intercalated discs anywhere. Okay. We'll talk about in muscle. We'll talk about what these lines are. We're not going to get into that now. These are called A bands. The dark bands are A bands, and then we have light bands, mid lines or M lines, and H zones. And yeah, muscle cell stuff gets a little bit heavy. That's why we usually wait until advanced to get too much into it. How a muscle contracts. We'll look at a lot of that next semester. Here's smooth. These are single nucleus. Okay, there's a nucleus. Here's multiples on here, but each one of these nucleus is a single smooth muscle cell. Okay. And again, you don't have the striations in here either in that organization. Smooth muscle, again, we'd see that throughout the vessels of the cardiovascular system. And we also see smooth muscle in just about any tube. So the esophagus will have smooth muscle, your urethra, your ureters, your fallopian tube, the vas deferens. List goes on. If it's a tube, it's smooth muscle. The entire GI tract. Stomach has smooth muscle, the intestines smooth muscle. So anyway, nervous tissue, and then we're done just about with tissues. Nervous tissue, again, we spend a lot of time on the nervous system. There's excitability and conductivity, so electricity and electrons are involved, an ionic charge. The three main organs of the nervous system are these three: the brain, spinal cord, and nerves. That really doesn't have a heck of a lot to do with what we're trying to get through today. But these three organs are going to be composed of nervous tissue, and we're going to generally see only two main cell types, the neuron and what we call neuroglia. Neuroglia is kind of like the matrix. That's that negative space that the neurons are basically immersed in or supported by. All right, a neuron has what we call dendrites. Okay, it also has a cell body, also known as a soma, and it has an axon. All neurons are going to have one axon and usually multiple dendrites. Sometimes they just have one. You could have a unipolar axon or a unipolar neuron where you have one dendrite, one axon, but typically we see multiple dendrites. When I look at a neuron, let's see, we'll come down to this one. We see the cell body of this neuron is the bulk of the neuron. You can even see the nucleus is dyed really dark. What's all of this stuff here? Remember, that's the neuroglia. Okay. All of this out here, neuroglia. You can see some lines. Those are going to be axons and dendrites. But wherever we see all these little spots, remember, darker spots imply there's a nucleus. So we do have a nucleus. We have a whole bunch of nuclei. These are going to be these are glial or glue. Glial, G-I-L-I, glial means glue, nerve glue. By the way, too, neurons do not regenerate. So you cannot get nerve cancer or neuron cancer. You can get brain cancer though, right? Yeah, I hope you don't, but you could. So how does that happen? If neurons don't go through mitosis, how can I have cancer, which is hypermitosis? That I don't know. It's a Lugol's solution. It's usually a dye they use. I don't know. I'm not a histologist. I do like histology, but I can do blood smears. I've got the right stuff for that at Elkhorn campus. So yeah, how the hell do I get a brain tumor if neurons don't multiply? They don't divide. How can I have excess tissue in my brain? Because it's the glial cells. They call them gliomas, right? Glioma. That's a fancy word for a brain tumor. Yeah, glioma. So anyway, axons, dendrites. So dendrites, the only thing I need you to know right now about neurons and nerve tissue and all of that is, nerve tissue. You have neurons and you have glial cells or neuroglia. The other thing you should know just initially is the three parts of a neuron, the dendrites, the cell body, and the axon. From there, we can determine the pathway of electrical flow through a neuron. Okay, transmission comes in through the dendrites, then the cell body, and then it leaves the axon and ends up at the axon terminal where it connects to dendrites of another neuron. You can see this axon traveling over to here. Its branches, it looks like right around in here, and connects with some dendrites of this neuron. So nerve transmission is going to flow dendrites into the cell body, down the axon to the dendrites of another neuron, out the axon to the dendrites of another neuron, and so on and so on. In the brain, these neurons are densely packed. Okay. If in the brain, this particular neuron has your name, and this neuron has, this one over here has your face. This one here has what I had for lunch. This one has what I need to do tomorrow. This one over here has my phone number when I was a kid, right? So now I see your face. Your name to the face is over here stored. So in order for me to connect face with name, I need a pretty clear connection. Okay. If I have dementia or Alzheimer's, you have what's called plaques and tangles. So these dendrites and axons, they get all tangled up, and then I get plaque buildup throughout some of these what they call synapses, where these things connect. So I could see your face, and then I want to come over here and make it over here to get your name and put it all together, but I end up over here with apple pie or what I had for lunch, or my phone number when I was a kid, or I'm all over the boards. I can't remember what I was talking about. I can't remember, you, so my grandma had Alzheimer's. She lived a long time with it, believe it or not. She was diagnosed in 1992, and she lived until right around February of '04. So not bad, about 12 years with from diagnosis. But we know she had it a hell of a lot longer than that. You just know, right? If you've been around folks with dementia or Alzheimer's, you know that you could pinpoint some certain situations and events where you're like, boy, grandma was whoops. Yeah. So anyway, she's awesome. She was a trooper the whole time. She was healthy as a horse physically the whole time. So at the very end, if you want to know where the jabber, that could maybe I'll end up with Alzheimer's. I don't know, but I hope not. But I wouldn't know it anyway. But the jabber, and that's from her. Yeah, she was a jabberbox. My other three grandparents are mutes. You couldn't get them to talk if you paid them, but she was. So anyway, that's it for tissue. Skin. I just want to mention a couple things because we're getting late, and I don't want to keep you too long. We've been doing pretty good. We're at 8:00. Any questions on tissues yet? Yeah, Craig, nice. That's what got Craig, I think, into nursing, right? Is I think taking care of grandpa who had dementia, and it's a Tuesdays with Maury, right? Tuesdays with grandpa, and every day with grandpa. Yeah, that's how it was with grandma. It was, and she had an amazing sense of humor before she had Alzheimer's. And again, the dividing line from she's normal to she's not normal is so blurry, because there were times even up to a couple of years before she died that she could hold a conversation like we are. She'd have those flashes, and then other time, most of the time it wasn't that way, but there was a lot of humor. She loved humor. She loved to be funny, and I love to be funny, and she loved, so you got to keep it light. If you get heavy with that stuff, oh man, you're talking about stressing the whole world out. You don't need to do that. If you don't laugh, you'll bawl your brains out, and nobody wants to bawl their brains out, right? Sometimes it's healthy though, right? It releases some of that emotional scarring, right? It's like ripping the Band-Aid off, or scar tissue coming off. So it's good to cry, but you want to be able to pick your moments for that stuff. But yeah, the one thing we know for sure is that we're all going to be meeting our maker someday, and so you want to don't take things too heavy. Don't be too heavy. Yeah. So anyway, I'm not going to go down that philosophical road. I'm going to stick with the plan here and stay with integumentary, our first body system. This is monumental. In fact, it's so monumental, I got to go back up. There we go. We're done for the most part with diving neck deep and staying in the deep end while treading water with a cinder block on our chest. Instead, we could throw the cinder block away. We can climb out of the pool and maybe go sit in the hot tub for a while we do the integumentary. So first body system, this is nice. We don't have to deal with all that micro stuff quite as much. So let's do it. Skin is your first introduction to a bunch of tissues put together. So remember, we did some chemistry. I know you'd like to forget, but don't. Chemistry, cells, tissues, now organs and organ systems. It's the largest organ of the body. It's not the largest organ internally. It is the largest organ, period, though. So if you're asked, what's the largest organ of the body? It is without question the skin. Maybe the largest internal organ might be the liver, I'd say. We do have other things than just skin. We have hair and nails. So we're not going to, WIDS doesn't need us to do much with hair and nails. I'm not going to do much with hair and nails either. Um, as you obviously, if you've seen anyway, structure of the skin, only two layers. There are multiple layers within those two, but epidermis and dermis, that's it. Those are the primary layers. The hypodermis is technically not part of the skin. It's kind of its own area, even though it has dermis in it. Hypodermis. So we'll look at that as well. So we go epidermis, epi, right? Means upon. Epidermis, epithelium. That's a slam dunk. Epidermis, epithelium. Dermis, connective tissue. Loose areolar connective tissue at that. Hey, we do have thin skin and thick skin. Thin skin, certainly, just like it sounds, is thinner than thick skin. Thin skin is what we see. And no, I know maybe you've been told you were thin skinned or maybe thick headed, thick skulled. I've been told that. But thick skin, thicker skin. No, we all have thin skin except on the palms of our hands and the soles of our feet. Okay, thick skin is really only found there. Palms of the hands. I'm not going to take my sock off and shoe and show you my foot, but yeah, I'm sure you know what your I don't know. I haven't seen the bottom of mine in a while, but it's there, and that's thick skin, which is good. We need padding. You know what doesn't happen with thick skin? What we hope, no hair, right? So palms of the hand, bottom of the feet are hairless. So thick skin, no hair follicles. That's the only difference, right? Location and then what's there. So here's a thick skin diagrammatic kind of illustration. The pretty colors, purple represents, again, a lot of dye of nucleus, the dye of nucleus, the dye of the nuclei of our cells. That's why it's so purple. Remember, if you see a lot of purple, it means there's a lot of cells densely compacted. And that's what we would see, right, with the epidermis stratified squamous. The other bright colors we see are reds and yellows and blues. The three primary colors. Yellow implies we're dealing with lipids or fats. Fat is almost always indicated with yellow in anatomy coloring. And then notice these are kind of a boy, I don't know what that's, more of like a sepia or kind of a brownish, yellowish color. That is going to also be indicative of fat, but specifically though, these are nerves. Nerves generally are kind of a dark yellow because the tissue that surrounds the nerves is called myelin, and myelin is basically lipids or fats. So that's why nerves are represented as yellow. There is a method to this coloring madness, believe it or not. They didn't just decide they wanted to color these because they like yellow or they like blue and purple together. Blue is indicative typically of veins. Not always, 99% of the time, blue is veins. 100% of the time, though, blue is going to be indicative of low oxygen. Red is indicative of some sort of high oxygen. So these are blood vessels. Usually red is arterial and blue is venous. And I'll say why I'm saying usually in about 3 or 4 weeks. You'll know why I said usually. Usually blue is vein, usually red is artery. And we do have one exception that we'll talk about later. So whenever you see blue and red, we're thinking blood. All right. Whenever we see yellow, we're thinking nerve and or fat. When we see purple, we're usually thinking, again, a lot of densely compacted cells together because, again, of the nuclei dying. So we don't see a lot of purple in this middle layer, which would make sense, right? Because this is that connective tissue layer where we have cells in a matrix, and the matrix is what makes up most of the connective tissue area there. So anyway, we also have what are called papillae. A papilla, one is a papilla, multiples are papillae. A papilla is just a little kind of a bump, just like a little hump or a bump. And papillae, again, are going these dermal papillae are going to connect at this dermo-epidermal junction. and provide, again, some sense of support and strength. It's kind of like um, the epidermis is on top of the dermis. And in the real world, if I want to put two kind of flattish surfaces together, like in crafting or woodworking or whatever, they say what's called scoring, right? You're going to score it. You're going to put a bunch of grooves into the surfaces, and what it does is it creates a little bit more of a connection. Instead of smooth surfaces on top of one another, you have kind of a rough surface connecting a rough surface, and you generally get a better connection. So that's in essence what the papillae were for. If we just had flat top of the dermis and a flat bottom of the epidermis, we wouldn't have as good of a cohesive connection with those two layers. So anyway, that's thick skin. This is thin skin. Thin skin is a little slightly different, and just in that it has a hair follicle and it has a couple of glands attached to it. We'll talk in more detail about some of these structures here in a few minutes, but that's really the main difference. Thick skin is going to have a thicker epidermis and no hair. Thin skin is going to have a thin epidermis and hair. So, and again, we know where it's located, bottoms of the feet. Yeah, like Velcro. Perfect. Yeah, like hook and loop. Excellent. Yeah, it's kind of like Velcro. Velcro's got the little micro hooks, and then you've got the loops that it hooks into, almost like that. Yeah, very similar. Let's see. We'll keep the train rolling here. Thick skin. And we'll look at all of that in more detail in just a second when we get to the dermis. Now, epidermis, we have four major cells. One takes up most of the epidermis, and that's number one. Keratinocytes are the primary cells of the epidermis. I'd say 85 to 90% of all cells of the epidermis are keratinocytes. They often call them corneocytes too. Corneo means kind of like horned, like a horned layer or corned. Anyway, so that's the bulk of it. Keratin. Melanocytes produce melanin, and these guys have to do with filtration of UV rays. Melanocytes are probably about 8 to 10%. So between keratinocytes and melanocytes, you've got nearly 100% of the cells of the epidermis. The other two cell types are called dendritic cells and tactile cells. The dendritic cells we saw the word dendrites with axons and neurons and cell bodies and all that good stuff with nerve tissue. Different thing. Dendrite just means kind of like an extension, like cell extensions can be called dendritic or dendrites. So just means long fingers in essence. These used to be called Langerhans cells. Langerhans is a person who I don't know if he discovered them as much as he was the first one to discover them, differentiate them, and give them a name. And so nowadays we're trying to get away from proper names. So that's why it's now called an epidermal dendritic cell. Merkel was the person who discovered these, and now they're called tactile cells. So tactile has to do with like touch, right? Tactile. Some of you are tactile learners, or your children are tactile learners. Most of us are what they call multimodal learners, meaning we learn by hearing, we learn by seeing, we learn by doing, we learn in multiple ways, right? Reading, visual, audio, reading, and kinesthetic are different types of learners. Most of us are a little bit of all of them. So anyway, here are the cells, locations and types. Again, we see most of them are purple. These are going to be the keratinocytes. Here's a melanocyte kind of hovering and hunkering down in this area. We've got a tactile Merkel cell. A tactile cell again, means something to do with touch, and tactile Merkel cells are going to be linked to the nervous system that's located within the dermis. Because remember, the epidermis does not have vascularization, nor does it have nerve supply. So, so how can we feel temperature or feel pressure or feel tickle, feel sharp, feel anything with our epidermis if it doesn't have nerves? Well, it's because nerves kind of plug in from the dermis. They kind of plug into the epidermis. So the nerve, like electricity, right? Like a frayed wire is still like, just because I've got a wire and it's been cut, but it's a live wire, it still has energy coming off of it, right? You can still feel electricity. So anyway, epidermis, nerves don't travel into the epidermis, but they connect with the epidermis at the dermoepidermal junction. This is that basement membrane. Okay, so tactile cells, and then here are those dendritics. Remember, dendrite means some sort of long extenders. So that's what we see there. Dendritic cells would have a lot to do with boosting immunity, helping to recognize maybe pathogenic or microorganisms that maybe penetrated the outer layers or the more superficial layers. And then melanocyte, again, helps with UV. Uh-oh, baby gotta go Betty bye. Need my tapioca in a bottle and get burped, maybe a diaper change, and I'll see you guys Thursday. Okay, anyway. Stratum basal. So let's look at the layers. Okay. Not just that we've got these types of cells, these cells are in layers too. The deepest layer that connects with the basement layer is called the basal or basal layer. Stratum basal or basal. That just means base layers. One layer of brand new babies. This is the hypermitotic area. This is where all of I almost said the S word. This is where it's really asex. I was going to say this. All the sex happens in the basement of the epidermis, but it's really asexual reproduction. Still in the basement though. And then we have the spies up here, the spinosal layer. That's that's these guys up here. They kind of keep an eye on the basement. They make sure that mitosis isn't too out of control. There's not too much going on down there. Hey, we can't, but we also don't want crickets chirping either. So we need something happening in the basement. So the spies of the spinosal cells kind of monitor reproduction. They monitor mitosis. They're like peeping toms. Oh, well, whatever. The spinosal cells used to be in the basement too. They can't. They got pushed out by the new group. Notice too, spinosal actually means spiny or spiky. So you would see kind of spiky, uh, not as rounded with the spinosal layer. That might be 4 to 10, 12 layers thick. The spinosal cells. Oh, a lot of RNA from the spinosal layer. We know RNA now, right? It has to do with protein and protein synthesis. What's going on with newborn baby cells? Well, again, they need they need food, they need protein. There's a lot of mitosis going on. There's a lot of transcription and translation. There's a lot of RNA need going on. So spinosal cells do help with some of that RNA stuff. So they're very rich in RNA. The granular layer, granular layer. So notice they're different too. Okay, they've got little grains in them. This is the waterproofing layer, the granulosum. Okay, the granulosum is waterproofing. That also tends to be where the dendritic cells kind of hang out. Lucidum, we don't see that layer in thin skin. We only see it in thick skin. It produces a keratin precursor called elidin. Okay. Lucidum means clear. Okay. Let's see. Lastly, let me back up the wagons. Here we go. Most of the outer, well, the entire outer superficial layers are called the stratum corneum. This is where we'd see the corneocytes or the keratinocytes that have become completely dehydrated or keratinized. So in essence, guys, we start down here with mitosis, a new bouncing baby, hydrated, beautiful, big cell is born. And then tomorrow it's up here. So it's a spinosal layer. Because why did it get pushed up here? Because more mitosis happened, right? From roughly 10% of all basal cells are going through mitosis each day. So if I've got a layer of 10 cells down here, one of those 10 is going to divide into two and push up into the next layer, that spinosal layer. And then day 3, day 4, day 5. So as we just keep we keep pushing as more get born. And by the time we get up here to the top, this cell, 28 to 35 days, roughly 35, about 5 weeks later, is going to be this cell up here. Old, dehydrated, ready to slough off. I said slough. That's an actual sciencey word. Okay. SLOUGH. It's like rough. Slough means to like, we call it dander, right? From pets. Maybe from humans too. I don't know what we call it. Dead skin cells, they call it. Call it dust, right? 90% of the dust in your house is dead skin cells, right? Skin snow. There you go. Yep. Yeah, ew is right. So, yep. Okay, that's good. Granulosum, corneum. Oh, this stuff I just met. 35 days from in essence, cradle to grave for these keratinocytes, from basement to the ether, uh, to being skin snow, takes about 35 days. All right. So this epidermal growth is happening rapidly and quickly. And we're in about 10% per day going through mitosis. DEJ, we've already talked about that, all right? That's where the dermis and epidermis meet. Okay, so let's get out of the epidermis and go into the dermis. The dermis is what they consider to be the true skin, only because this is where all of the physiological stuff is going on. This is blood supply. This is where hair follicles originate. Oh, Lori, dang it! You need a pet egg, or a not you. Well, you need a, it's like your tool belt, right? You gotta have a pet egg in your tool belt, and probably a taser, right? Maybe maybe a taser and a pet egg. That'll get them going. Oh man, yeah. Epsom salts and a warm bath. Dunk those suckers in and lather. Oh yeah, yuck. The pet egg, or that one. There's just a sandblaster that works too. Oh, and the smell. Oh man. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Cheese grater. Yikes. Ooh, yes. All right. Well, yeah. Okay. Dermis. We're almost there. You guys need to quit distracting me. Uh, so, true skin. We made it. Oh, man. I had, let me think of what it's called. Ichthyosis. You guys heard of that? Ichthyosis. Uh, it's the alligator disorder. Alligator skin. Yeah. Ooh, I worked with a guy years ago. I was actually, I think, still in college. Um, I hadn't even, so this is a long time ago, mid 90s, the dark ages. I was working at a bookstore. Oh yeah, you can't do it. Um, God, what a horrible way to live. Here, I'm going to type it into the chat if you guys want to look it up. Um, ichthyosis. I think that's about right. It's an oddball word. Yeah, he was a young kid. He was in his 20s. He was born with it, but it's like hypermitotic skin, and it's kind of a greenish color, and it's cracked everywhere from head to toe, and just the smell and the ooze and the horrible way to live. I can't even imagine. And if you're born with it, it's congenital. If you look up an ichthyosis like at birth, it looks like something from another world. It's like sci-fi. So anyway, bless their souls, right? Bless, in the South they say, bless your heart, right? Ooh, I can't even imagine living like that. But Jesse was his name. He was I worked at a Barnes and Noble years, and again, a college job, and he worked in receiving. So this guy was like picking up boxes of books. I mean, his hands were like this because he couldn't even open his hands because they just crack and bleed everywhere. Ooh. So yeah, look that one up. Ichthyosis. So dermis, that's the next stop. That's the big, the true skin. This is blood supply, etc. We also see our first muscle. We finally got to our first muscle. It's called an erector pili. It means pili is hair in Latin, right? If you took Spanish or no Spanish, or our if you speak Spanish, you know, pelo means hair. Pili means hair as well. Erector means erect. So the hair standing erect, that muscle will do that, the erector pili. And we've got a couple of nerve endings. I'm not going to get into any detail. Just remember, nerves are in the dermis. Blood supplies in the dermis. We also, remember, epidermal growth and repair is fast. Dermal growth and repair, not so fast. Generally, again, we're going all the way back to the beginning of the night. We looked at one of the first slides on tissue repair. So that's what we see with the dermis. The hypodermis, again, not technically part of the skin. We call this the subcutaneous layer. They often call it subcutaneous fat. They call it superficial fascia as well. Fascia, that's a new word maybe for some of you. That fascia is the kind of clear, almost opalescent sheath that's over the top of your skeletal muscles. You've seen it if you've ever eaten a steak or cut into a steak, or if you've ever had not eaten raw chicken. God, don't do that. But if you've ever had raw chicken breasts and you're taking out of the package and there's that kind of little chunk of white fat and it's kind of connected to this clear stuff, that's fascia, all of that clear stuff. And fascia is a kind of a protective, connective membrane on top of muscle. So basically your skin, including then the hypodermis, attaches to muscle via this fascia. Scar tissue, a lot of times adhesions and scar tissue is fascia that has adhered to underlying tissue. Whether it's muscle tissue or overlying tissue of the skin. So a lot of scarring is fascia that inhibits range of motion. So in physical therapy, we do what's called myofascial release, where we go in with scar tissue. We just basically try to kind of break it up and improve range of motion. It can be painful for the patient while it's going on, but in the long run, it's extremely beneficial. We see some amazing results long term. We've prevented extra surgeries from doing it. We've prevented surgeries from doing it. Some folks who have some sort of physical traumas to their joints or muscles that try to do everything to prevent having surgery. Myofascial release oftentimes is the only thing we can ever get any results from. So It's kind of cool. But anyway, not part of the skin. Melanin again, is the pigment going. So now we're kind of putting on the brakes. We did epidermis, dermis, hypodermis. Now we're just going to talk about a couple of the functional aspects of skin, and then we're done. I promise. Melanin is the skin, one of the skin colors or pigments, but that's the primary pigmentation of the skin. And again, you want to go into the Padlet, watch the video in there that I have on UV exposure. It'll talk a little bit about eumelanin and pheomelanin as well. Again, I don't think I ask any questions, so I'm pretty sure there's nothing specific about the types of melanin. Tyrosine is an amino acid, and there's an A's that goes with it. Okay, tyrosine A's. Some folks are born without that enzyme, right? It's an enzyme, isn't it? ASE on the end. It's the enzyme for tyrosine. So it breaks tyrosine into L-dopa and dopaquinone, and then we get into some real crazy chemistry. L-dopa, maybe that's dopamine related. You maybe think of that as like Parkinson's disease and one of the medications. This is different, but anyway, they call it levodopa. It's a levodopterin. It's a pharmaceutical for Parkinson's. It mimics dopamine. Don't get that confused with this. Some of you have clinical experience and have heard maybe of L-dopa. I'm an L-dopa. I'm an L-dopo sometimes, actually. But anyway, tyrosine A, some people don't have that enzyme, and so they may be albino. They have what's called albinism. They're unable to produce melanocytes. All right. So anyway, you've probably seen albino bunny rabbits. They've got the red eyes, and they're albino rats or whatever. Some humans are albino too. This is complex. You don't need to worry about that, but this is FYI. It's kind of fascinating. We see a melanocyte. They spritz out these little ketchup packets called melanosomes, and inside the melanosomes are little. It's more like maybe like a Kool-Aid packet or an emergency packet or something like that, or like, oh no, you know what it is? It's like one of those little pepper packets like you get in the plastic silverware or the salt. It's like one of those. And then so we get to a keratinocyte. Remember, the majority of your epidermis is keratinocytes. They're the ones that need to be protected, because the primary skin cancer that we see is going to be some sort of basal carcinoma or something like that, or a squamosal issue with the skin. Malignant melanomas are rare, but they're the worst. And so we can hopefully fend off malignant melanomas by protecting from UV exposure. But anyway, it's the keratinocytes that need the protection. And so, believe it or not, these melanocytes get hit with a little bit of UV. They start releasing some of their pepper packets, and these pepper packets get opened up and dumped on top of the nucleus. And now we've got a nuclear cap covered with sunscreen, in essence. So the keratinocytes and the nucleus are now protected. And why do we need to protect the nucleus? Why does it need its own little version of sunscreen? Because that's where the DNA is stored, and UV rays can cause mutations in the DNA of these keratinocytes. Pretty cool, really. I mean, physiology is fascinating. But again, I don't want you to feel like you got to memorize and get all these patterns of events, and you do that later next year. Same with it. This is too heavy. We got to keep the line moving, bro. Let's see, other pigments. Carotene. You've maybe heard of that. Beta carotene. That's an orange pigment found in carrots, found in sweet potatoes like squashes. If you have babies and you give them a lot of carrots and sweet potatoes, oh man, just go get some real carrots, real sweet potatoes, boil those babies up in water, bake the sweet potato, mash them up, get them all mushy, and feed them. You don't need to buy any of that stuff in the can. You can make it at home for cheaper and it's healthier. And these little buggers, their lips will get orange and their faces. That's good. That just means they're getting a lot of good nutrients. Okay. Lipofuscin, that's their age spots. And then we've got hemoglobin, of course, is the carrier of oxygen in your red blood cells. And so high blood pressure can lead to bright skin, red skin, super low blood pressure, pallor, or being pale, right? So various degrees of color. We look at that when we look at our patients, and that could be a determinant of blood flow quality or lack thereof, blood pressure issues. But yeah, we look at skin in a lot of ways, not just is it cut, is it burnt, does it need suturing, does it need cutting, whatever. It's in other ways too. The skin is an amazing indicator of underlying health in different body systems. If we've got a lot of acnes, blemish, and I'm not talking like teeny boppers or hormonal acne and pimples. I'm talking folks who have some serious cysts and boils and um, carbuncles and peduncles, and those are real things. You can't make those words up. Well, you could, but somebody did, or at some point. But there's all kinds of weird skin stuff, right? Keloids, and so anyway, all of these different types of skin issues, and then you've got like psoriasis and eczemas, and these are simply indicators of underlying issues, you know. So it's usually related to some sort of enzyme that might be lacking or too much of. Relating to hydration issues, could be related to lymphatic health. Usually that's a big one. If you've got patients that are just that have some serious acne rosacea or something like that, like we're thinking they've got some kidney issues, they've got liver problems, they might have some drug abuse or alcohol abuse issues, pharmacology abuse. Um, uh, they've got some serious lymphatic and filtration issues. And the skin, by the way, when you think of a filter, you think of oh, my battery's getting low. I know I better zip it. When the things, you can't see it, but on my side, everything kind of faded out. It's because my battery's getting low. So I left my cord upstairs. But anyway, yep. See, there's that Alzheimer's. I was talking about something and poof, I got distracted. My screen went blank. I think it was probably, skin conditions, right? You think of filters, your liver and your kidneys, right? And your lymph nodes, those are your filters internally. When those fail or they're clogged, right? Just like filters get clogged in the real world, yours can get clogged, yours can get sluggish, gumped up, slowed down. How do you filter stuff? You can push stuff out through the skin. So skin conditions oftentimes are indicators of weak or malfunctioning or dysfunctional filters internally. So always consider that too when you're dealing with skin on a clinical level. A big one, right? Jaundice. Oh wait, cyanosis, right? Cyanosis, cyan is blue. I think that's one of the crayons in that. You got to get the big box, like the 164 box, or has the sharpener. You might get cyan in there. CYAN. It just means blue. Osis means condition of. So cyanosis, condition of turning blue. Central cyanosis could mean central sayonara if you don't get the Heimlich or you don't get help, because that means that you're probably choking and you're not getting oxygen to your brain or anywhere else you need it. Peripheral cyanosis we'll see maybe in the lips or the nail beds. That happens with a lot of old people or elderly people, or people who simply just have blood distribution issues. They have low oxygen right? Hemoglobin levels, oxygen levels are going to be low. That's what's going to cause cyanosis. And again, if it's peripheral, it's a chronic condition, an indicator of weak heart and some other, many other things, I'm sure, that we could get into. But central cyanosis, that's an acute issue and usually means they're choking. Bile pigments and jaundice, right? Jaundice, bilirubin is the pigment in bile. Some of you might remember him too. I don't know. Um, he got in trouble a lot, I think, in school, Billy, but he was a punk, and he's yellow, and he can turn your skin orange and things like that. That's a bad thing. You don't want jaundice. Babies have it, right? Newborns sometimes, but we stick them under some UV and it perks them up and they're fine. But when adults get jaundice, it's usually a bad. When I say bad, in all seriousness, jaundice in an adult is usually a death sentence. Well, I think being conceived is a death sentence, right? Because we're all going to die. But I mean, like in reality, like at that, like you've got weeks or months potentially is all. If you have jaundice, it's a liver dysfunction. Usually we see it in pancreatic cancers as well. So, yep, jaundice. Yeah, sure. Yep. Yeah, more lysine. So, yeah, little buggers get it. But, the liver does a million things. And one of them has to do with bile production. And sometimes we just need the liver to be more active and busy doing other stuff. And when it starts doing other stuff, then creating bile, then we'll see jaundice go down. And UV exposure triggers cholecalciferol, right? Vitamin D synthesis. And that can be enough of it's like the liver is stuck in job. It's stuck doing what normally is a priority at number 5 or 6, like dis- the liver destroys red blood cells, right? And one of the side effects or one of the byproducts of destruction of red blood cells is bilirubin, which is the pigment. And so for bile, so the liver destroys red blood cells, recycles some of the product, and makes bile with it, stores it in the gallbladder. That's job 5 or 10. Job 1 or 2, it may be like vitamin D synthesis. And so if UV triggers vitamin D synthesis, basically what I'm doing is reprioritizing what the liver is doing. That's all. That's really what it is. Reprioritizing the liver's duties. We want it to be destroying red blood cells down here, not up here. And that'll cause then the jaundice usually to go down in little buggers. Big buggers, not so much. It's usually an indicator of liver failure or pancreatic failure. Pancreatic tumors will sometimes be so big they'll block the duct that bile leaves, and so bile gets distributed in the bloodstream, and then it ends up in your skin. And your severe alcoholism, they'll have jaundiced whites of the eyes. Their eyes are now yellow of the eyes, not whites of the eyes. Okay, so that's another indicator. If you have a patient that comes in with yellows eyes, we know their liver's probably shot. Okay. Surface film, again, I mentioned right at the beginning of tonight, surface film is going to be antibacterial. It's going to help with lubrication, hydration of the skin. It's a buffer, certainly, against irritants, blocks caustic and toxic agents. Again, this is another reason why, you want to be careful with the amount, especially now we're constantly being bashed over the head with hand sanitizers and soaps. And that's a good thing, right? We do want to be sanitary, especially if we're around people and we're out and about. But we also we don't want to go overboard. You don't want to excessively OCD it with antibacterial soaps and creams and lotions and gels and spritzes and sanitize. That can actually disrupt your body's normal flora. Your normal biome can get disrupted by some of the alcohols that are in that stuff. And so anyway, just be aware. pharmaceutical companies are the same. They also pump out your lotions and gels and toothpastes and other stuff. They don't just make pills. They make things that you use every day that could in excess lead you to getting sick, and then you got to go to the doctor and get a pill that's made by the same company that made the thing that got you sick to begin with. So you got to be careful with that vicious cycle of Johnson and Johnson and Procter and Gamble and some of these big names that are pumping out lotions that are filled with waxes and alcohols and paraffin dye and dyes and paraben, which is a wax, hidden form of a wax name. There's a bunch of OLs, right? Alcohols, alcohol dehydrates. Waxes make you feel kind of like your skin's smooth. So while it's dehydrating, it makes you feel smooth because of the wax, but then it dries out and you put more lotion on. And it's this vicious cycle of lotion. And who wins? You don't, because at some point you got to go back to the store because your pump's empty. And you got to go buy another pump, and then you get home, and then you've spent $8 on another bottle of lotion, and your skin's still dry. I mean, come on, lack of lotion isn't why your skin's dry. Just like lack of a pill isn't why you have the shits. It's probably lack of something else, or too much of something. But yeah, you don't, you got to be careful with going down those roads. All right. So anyway, where are we and I think we're done. We should be if we're not. Functions of this. We already know this. Skin is for sensation, flexibility. It excretes water and urea. We talked about UV light and vitamin D and that, right? You need some vitamin D, calcium and vitamin D and UV. They're all connected. You would I know they just don't get it. And you start telling you, if you use common sense, some people get testy because they're so beholden to their ways, and common sense isn't common, right? It's more like uncommon sense. So that's why we come in. Craig, at the beginning, you said you're not a teacher. Well, not yet, but all of you are teachers if you're going to be working in the healthcare industry, right? You're going to be teaching your patients. You're going to be teaching each other. You're going to be teaching the doctors even occasionally. Some of them, believe it or not, they're open-minded, so that's a good thing. We've got a new batch in, and they're pretty darn good because they're more aware of what we're talking about. So, but anyhow, you guys are all teachers, or you will be to some degree. You're communicators, and that's what's important. The power of communication. Communication breakdown is probably the leading cause of stress. Yeah. People don't feel like they can communicate, or they communicate ineffectively, or they don't,
Or cats.
Yeah, cats too. And communication with cats. That's the leading cause of my stress. Although I don't have cats, but if I did, my cats are children. Yeah, but I don't spray them with water though.
Yes, you do. You've done it before. Don't lie, master.
I have this summer. It was outside though. It was the garden hose, and there was a pool involved. So yeah, I guess I have sprayed them. They weren't being naughty.
They're naughty.
Now, yeah, you're right. Yeah, kids. That's why kids. That's how they communicate. They can't say things, so they scream, right? And cats,
You spray
other
them.
Animals. Yep.
Just spray them with water.
Yep. That'll cool them down. It's called behavior modification.
I know that term.
I spray my kids. Yeah,
It's
good.
like
I had a babysitter. I sprayed, right. I had a babysitter when I was a kid.
With dogs or something.
She wore moccasins, and if you were acting up, if you were being an idiot, it was like a boomerang moccasin. She would take the moccasin off and fling it across the room, and it would hit you, and then it would end up back on her foot. Somehow, usually it was you picking it up and taking it to her after she hit you with it. But yeah, sometimes you gotta get nudged occasionally, right? And a good moccasin across the room to the back of the head. Sometimes it works. I find tone works really well with my kids, and that look.
Tone? Yeah, just tone of voice.
Tone and a look. They know there's
Yeah.
one
You
look.
just put your eyebrows down.
That's it. Tilt the head,
Yeah.
give them the look, boom, done. Yeah. So kids are cool.
Or
They're
you're
very
getting
responsive.
sprayed by water.
Yeah. Well, usually I'm the one getting sprayed. Yeah. It's because
Alrighty.
remember, guys, it's spa day every day here, right? It's Barbies and spa and, so I don't, one of these nights I'm going to come in, I'll have forgotten and I'll have nail polish on. Just warning you. It's that peel off kind though. So if you see me doing this, I probably forgot to take my nail polish off from my spa treatment before class. So anyhow, I don't want to belabor any more of this or keep any of you any longer than I already have. All right, you guys. We're gonna. You know what I'm gonna do though.